we're in Connecticut, hanging out here with Carl, longtime supporter, really good guy. Also, long time in the trades.
Yeah.
And we're trying to focus on this year, just, getting out, having conversations, talking with guys like yourself. Been doing it a long time, seen a lot of changes. We get a lot of questions, a lot of younger guys coming up, hyped about the opportunity to not be in an office, make some money. And I think, a conversation here just about, guys coming up, guys that are just, coming out of high school or just looking for alternative kind of paths in terms of how to make money and what some opportunities might be. Just talk a little bit about your journey.
Yeah.
And a little bit about your skill set and your trade and, how does a young guy in the Connecticut area go about, finding his way towards this kind of work.
Yeah. It's tricky though. And I don't think I would recommend my path to anybody, because I did it out of frustration and lack of any other opportunity. I was like, all right, well, can't afford college and I don't want to go back for 4 years just to start and incur a bunch of debt. Right. But I was upset, frustrated at my position as a mechanic. Right. And I actually enjoyed that work because it was fun. Right. I mean, you got to go out and tow cars and fix stuff and play around with engines. But, that's there's not a whole lot of old mechanics out there who are really loving their job. You're bending over all day or you're working overhead. You're out in the elements constantly and the pay sucked. That was the big thing. I mean, honestly, I'll tell you, if they were paying me $35 an hour, I might have stayed there, But at the time I was making $11 and that was up from $9, which was like, whoa. When I started my first year as being an apprentice, I was making $13 an hour and we had overtime. And I was like, I felt like I was making money hand over fist. I'm like, this is great. The hours are shorter. I'm making more money.
What year was that?
2005, maybe.
Interesting.
Something like that. Yeah. It was a long time ago, but so about 20 years ago, and it was like it was right before the residential collapse, right? So the housing collapse happened, and it was just we were doing a lot of houses before that, a lot of little developments where they would have maybe a dozen types of homes and you would just crank them out. Yeah. And so we would do a lot of those. But then when the housing market collapsed in 2008, the company I was working for shifted pretty hard to doing commercial and industrial and stuff like that. So.
And your path, it started in a vocational school for training.
Yep.
Just talk about, was it as simple as finding one? Did you look into it in terms of the location or how long it was going to take, or did you just go dive, head first into it? Or
I just drove right to the closest one, which was, again, I wouldn't recommend that path for anybody. Right. And I think that if I had known all the different options, I probably would have chosen a different one, even just an electrical. Right. Because it's I mean, the end result is that you end up in a pretty cool place working for a great company, but the way you get there could have been a little bit smoother. And when you're working for some of these smaller contractors, they actually kind of want to hold you back a little bit.
They want to keep you in that laborer role as long as they can, or the grunt work. Or
I remember asking my boss what would be the next step, and he's like, "No, this is pretty much it. Yeah, you're gonna run a small crew, and that's gonna be the end of it." And I'm like, no, I don't think that's true. These bigger jobs, they must have other people who are there. And they did everything they could to kind of prevent me from even finding that information out. But being a pain in the ass and tenacious, I was going and asking people. And matter of fact, I emailed everybody I could find that had an email address in the biggest companies in the Northeast. And come to find out, it was 8 years later, the only guy who responded, I was sitting across from him at an interview. And I'm like, I don't know if you remember me, but I wrote this email. Cool. And he was the only guy who responded to it. Yeah.
He remembered as well. That's cool.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, yeah.
That's awesome. First year in the job, what was the average hours in a week? What was it? What was your time? I think there's also a lot of disconnect of there's a lot of everything's roses, everything's great, best opportunities, but there's a reality to skilled labor. There's a reality to how hard you work, the hours that you're up, when you have to be on the job site, the weather you have to work in. Yeah. So let's talk about your first couple of years when you're out there, you're on a crew, you're working, how many average hours were you putting in a week? When did you have to be on the job site in the morning?
Yeah. Well, we were doing a typical 8-hour day back in those times. It was 7 to 3:30, which again was a big change because I was working 7 to 5 at the auto shop. Thursdays we worked 7 to 7. And that was what I was used to. So I'm like, oh man, I'm working less hours. This is great, but that's kind of typical. We were also doing Saturdays, and I think we'd work till about noon, and then we'd cut off. So, I mean, what does that add up to? About, 44 hours, something like that. A little bit of OT in there.
Nothing insane, but just different hour, different schedule.
Yeah. And then, you work some places like, we work in Greenwich or someplace that was a really far commute, and we'd do 410s just to prevent driving down there that Friday.
You don't deal with it as much.
Yeah.
So amazing job site next door, taking a look at a lot of stuff happening here. Tons of subs out there, a lot of stuff happening. You are privy to a lot of stuff going on, a lot of different subs going in, a lot of different demand on these kind of commercial projects. You're privy to what happens in the bidding process, all this kind of stuff. What do you see in terms of opportunity in the next 5 years, the next 3 years, the next 10 years, in terms of specific trades? Are you able to see like a real shortage within certain segments? Is it across the board? Just in terms of like, if you had a little crystal ball, and we don't have to look back at this 2 years and not say any of your predictions were wrong, but if you had a little crystal ball and say it's my cousin, he's just coming up, and he I don't think college is for him. Mm-hmm. Loves being outside, tricks his truck out. He wants to go to work. Yep. Like what, if you were sitting here and you were his big cousin, what would you say? Like, hey, you really should look here, because there's going to be, it's supply and demand, right? There's a lot of demand on it, and it's going to be in need, and there's going to be some good money in it. Yeah,
it's a tricky question, because I don't think you'd find anybody out there who said, oh, we have a surplus of people who want to come and work for us. It seems like across the board, you have everybody saying it's hard to find good people, right? And they're actually accepting people who they maybe would have turned away because they need the bodies. And they're going, well, this guy, he can't do X, Y, and Z, but he can do that, and we'll just have him doing that, right? Whereas the rock stars can rise really quick. That's the good thing, right? I mean, but if I had somebody who was asking me what they should get involved in, it would depend a lot on the person and what they wanted to do. If I had to do it over again, I think I would get into being a crane operator.
Interesting.
Because it's like you get to deal with big, cool stuff all day. The one downside is that, you're kind of locked into that little cockpit, but gone are the days where you're like looking up at the pick. I mean, your whole thing goes back. And I mean, it's just, these things are like Cadillac. It's unbelievable. Sure. And here in New England, where we get such a swing, just being able to be in the AC or have some heat on a day like today, that's a major luxury. And, you can make good money doing it, depending on the certifications. You get your tower crane license. I mean, you can do some big work that's very high up where you don't even see the bottom of the pick or where it ends up. You see it kind of go by you and everything else is done through the radio. So, but again, there's a big barrier to entry because you have to have certifications. Locations, right? If you want to work here in the tri-state area, well, you have to get your license in each. That's just it. So there's not a whole lot of reciprocity. Or
pretty inclusive though. I was telling you about some sites. I was on with a friend of mine in the local 7 in Boston, and female crane operator, and like all the dudes just loved her, had so much respect for her because she, making their lives easier with how good she is at it, and she was a total badass and had been doing it for a long time, and was like, she was kind of leader of the pack on the whole site. It was really cool to see. So interesting you say that, because the machines are wild. Like the one she was operating was wild.
Oh yeah. Well, don't forget that a lot of times the operators can make your job easy or they can make it hell, right? So we need a pick done. And if you start off the job getting in the good graces, maybe doing a few favors for somebody where you maybe don't have to. One of the things that earlier in the jobs that I always try to do is like take care of everybody's job trailer. Everybody needs power. Everybody's bringing their trailers in. Everybody needs power. They need, internet. So you hook them up, make sure they're good. If there's a problem, you respond and everything like that. That kind of good grace goes a long way later in the job. And same thing with temporary lighting with, electrical, right? You give people the lighting where they need it. If they request it, you kind of jump on it, right? And then later, if you need a pick, or if you need any number of different things, you're excavating or you have to do a cut because something wasn't run right or whatever, just being able to have a few favors to call in later in the job, they pay dividends. And especially with crane operators, you need some stuff picked. Well, they might move you up in the queue, or they might be, it just works out in your favor,
Being friends with a forklift driver. Yeah. It's, it comes from kind of a selfish place, right? We're a brand and we're a premium price point brand. So we want to see more guys getting into the trades, more guys earning in our kind of place. But, and we see stuff out there on social media everywhere, like, normalized trade school and this and that. And there's some great projects going on, but like, what can what can brands do? What can people in this space do to make it feel more inclusive, to help educate a little bit more? We had a cool conversation outside where like, you commented a little bit where like there may be some more awareness at different levels throughout young people's life to let people know that this is our opportunities. And you don't see like a lot of like, I don't see a lot of construction companies or brands like, marketing and around this stuff, even though there's a lot of kind of trade schools happening. Like, in your opinion, like, what do you think should happen? Should brands get more involved in this? I know some construction companies are starting their own trade schools and their own programs because they realize it's such a labor shortage. And I was telling you about the Meta ad I was recently served, like people learning to weld in the Metasphere. Like, if we have to put all these people on the field to economically in the country to meet all this new legislation, infrastructure, projects, housing shortage, all this kind of stuff, and there's a gap in understanding that these opportunities exist. And there's a gap understanding that there's, trade school opportunities. Like, what can a 1620 do? What can other companies do? What can labor unions do? Just like, in your opinion, that might kind of help it. Because like our goal with this and our goal with this conversation is to, of course, increase awareness, have some conversation. If like one or two guys takes away what Carl has to say and it changes their young 20s, like, good stuff. Like, that's what we've always been about, like trying to make the best product, trying to give these guys the best gear for, for their life and what they kind of deserve. And in terms of any of this kind of educational content we're doing, that's kind of the goal as well too. So I don't know, just maybe so I can steal some ideas for our brand, but like, what do you think we could do? What do you think companies can do, and just what can be done, because awareness has to grow?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, part of it too is wanting to be a member of a club. So if that club is the skilled trades or construction or farming or, any kind of blue collar work, the more enticing you can make that club by, okay, well, look, now there are brands that will come out and ask you what you need, right? Speaking to the guys on site, and instead of just wondering in a bubble or trying to figure out what people might need, you're actually talking to people and getting some feedback. I always thought that went a long way as far as a brand being in touch with the customer. I remember specifically the people from Ingersoll Rand came down when I was a mechanic asking us about their new impact gun. How would you use it? Would you change the direction with your thumb, or do you like the little rotary thing in the back? And they got a whole bunch of feedback. And I don't think I ever bought that gun, but at the same time, I was like, at least they're trying to find out how people use them. They're not saying, well, we put the thing there because that's where it works out best for our engineers. So same thing, speaking to the people out on site and actually seeing what they need rather than what somebody who maybe has a design degree thinks they need, actually getting the feedback is where I think it goes a long way. If you were talking to people, maybe they wouldn't have a great answer for you because they don't know what they need, right? They I want it to be cheaper, I want it to last longer. It would probably be what you would get, right? Or I need a specific pocket for this little screwdriver I got from my uncle once upon a time. But it's tough, and I think that really the big opportunity now is being seen as a member of that club, because we see a lot of there are a lot of companies that are entering the workwear space, but don't seem like they're one of us, right? So when you actually can be seen as, okay, yeah, you came from here. It's no different than when your foreman is telling you to do something and they started off digging ditches. They know what it took. They're part of that group. They speak that way. Right. And it's a lot better. And I think it's a lot more welcoming than a big conglomerate just kind of, selling you some brown colored
just another consumer shirts we can pump a bunch of stuff into, I think.
Yeah.
The marketplace kind of defines what it is, and it's there isn't a tougher customer. There isn't a tougher customer to BS than a blue collar guy. And I think, at the end of the day, the brands that kind of stand the test of time are the ones that do it the right way. And it's not always typically, you've seen some great brands. You've been privy to a lot of brands' growth and a lot of their trajectories. Like, it's the ones who take time and do it right and do right by their customers. I think that have the staying power, But we live in a world of fast food, fast fashion. And
but that
stuff quick.
To your point, though, I think in a way it's like putting a face to the brand, right? Because there's some that I can think of where it just seems like it's this faceless operation run by a cabal of people who are, in some office, right? But you don't know. Whereas if there's an actual person who is out there talking to people in the mix, has their finger on the pulse of what the customer needs, for sure, that type of mentality, I think is I really can't think of many companies that are doing that right now. you know, and it's maybe not the easiest thing to do, as you see. I mean, like, we can't get access to this site. It's just, it's no place, you can't just walk on.
No, for sure. No.
But whether that maybe comes from speaking to people virtually through social media, or, you know, just being in the comment section when you see stuff, or whatever, or, you know, trade shows, and actually talking to the people and putting a face with the company, because people don't really have loyalty to a logo and a brand name and stuff like that. They think of the person behind it, you know, which is why, you know, mascots work so well. But there's a big opening, because the biggest workwear brands out there are nothing more than like a logo and a tagline. So putting a little bit more of a personal touch to it, I think, would be a good move.
Interesting. Another question, and is more, there's a few of my friends are going through this right now. There's a lot of midlife changes where a lot of guys are disenchanted or disenfranchised from their white collar world, college educated or whatever, and are looking towards opportunities in the trades.
Yeah.
Across, and are you seeing some of that? And I think that might even be a tougher juncture or a tougher starting point. I do think that, like, at the end of the day, it's going to be about bodies. And I think, you know, if you can get the search and you understand it, you can do the work, like, you know, people are going to need you.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot more of that. We're seeing a lot more messages of the 35-year-old guy, the 28-year-old guy, even sometimes, you know, the mid-40s guy that's doing like a really big pivot in life. A lot of his more kind of sole proprietor kind of work, not necessarily stuff that takes as long to get to the levels, you know, that you're at or whatever. But I'm curious if you're seeing some of that, and if you get any advice to guys that are just, you know, they're over the commute, or their big tech company just laid them off after 15 years of service, and they got a couple kids and they got to feed them, which is a situation that's happening out there a lot.
Sure.
Any words of advice?
Yeah. I mean, we do have, it used to be that, you know, the old apprentice wasn't really a thing, right?
Right.
And in a way, you have an advantage. The earlier you start, the more energy you have, the more resilient you are. You know, you get up the next day and you're just ready to go. Whereas nowadays, you know, in my 40s, it maybe takes a little bit longer.
Sure.
So, you know, that's an immediate disadvantage. And it's also where the gear can come in, right? So if you have a lot of things that are working against you all day because you don't know how to outfit yourself to do the job that you're doing, you're going to be less resilient, less effective at your job, less safe. So, you know, having all that stuff in place as you go out and do what you have to do is a big thing. But you also come, if you're a later adopter of a skill trade or something like that, with a new perspective that maybe the guys who have been stuck in that since they were 18 don't have anymore. You know, so maybe you're somebody who spent a lot of time in an office and you have a refinement and you have a skill with being professional, so that you can actually be the guy who has to go into these finished spaces and install receptacles, finish stuff, light fixtures, a lot of those things that have to happen. And often you can't get the guy who was the bull of the crew, right? Because he's like a bull in a china shop, going into these finished spaces and actually presenting well. So often the big challenge is figuring out where somebody will fit. You don't want to make a fish climb a tree. So if somebody is good at one particular thing, then that's what you do. And perhaps if you come into the trade later in life with a background in something that's unique like that,
Might be a strength.
it could be a strength, right? And it might be one of those things that you have to point out to somebody because maybe they don't see it in you, but, you know, foremen worth their salt, they pick up on that stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah. Interesting time. It's going to be really interesting to see how the next few years played out. We're excited to be in this space, and just want to thank you. You've kept us honest. You've given us some great reviews, but you've been tough on us too, and held our toes to it. And we've always tried to make product that you're one of the guys. If it kind of meets your barometer, it means a lot, and we want to thank you. And just, you know, we're trying to have some of these conversations with guys whose opinions we really value, and just get this kind of conversation out there, get people talking about it. And like I said, if we can help some smaller businesses get some more people, some guys find their way, you know, to make a good living, all good stuff. But we appreciate it, man. It's really cool to get up here and see your ops and get on the camera next to you, man.
Absolutely.
So appreciate you, buddy.
My pleasure, dude.
Thank you, bud.
For sure.
Right on.